Hello, dear viewers. If this is your first time on the channel, brace yourself. Today's story will shock you, enrage you, and leave you with deep reflection. But before we dive in, we kindly ask you to like the video, share it with your community, and most importantly, leave a comment below. Every share, every piece of feedback you give not only helps this video reach more people, but also builds a stronger community, one where truth is heard and justice never stands alone. Together, we are power. That afternoon, the sky above the Eastfield neighborhood was unusually clear. Jason Whitaker stood beside the tulip bed in his front yard, holding a garden hose, sunlight glinting off the glass face of the weekend watch he always wore. A few steps behind him, his wife, Emily, was carefully hanging a spring wreath she had spent the entire morning crafting. It was a soft fabric wreath, adorned with faux flowers and a simple yellow ribbon. Nothing flashy, nothing that could remotely be called disruptive. But it was at that very moment, everything fell apart. A matte black SUV with no license plate crept slowly down the road like a predator stalking prey under the calm afternoon sun. The car door flung open. Two men stepped out, Frank and Kyle Dawson, dressed in pseudo-military uniforms, camo pants, black shirts, imitation tactical vests, and reflective sunglasses that masked their faces entirely. Plastic ID badges hung from their chests, emblazoned with the words HOA Enforcement Division, something that, at a glance, looked official, but was really just a cheap printout from a trophy shop. "You're in violation of Regulation 14.3 regarding front door decorations," Frank announced, his tone mimicking a real law officer. "Please step forward for compliance enforcement procedures." Emily froze. Jason set down the hose and approached, frowning. "It's just a wreath. Are you serious?" But no one was laughing. Kyle pulled out a smudged, barely legible printout from his vest. An HOA logo faded almost to nothing, and a signature that looked like it had been scribbled with a computer mouse. "If you don't comply, we're authorized to carry out a temporary detainment for community protection." Before Jason could take another step, chaos erupted in an instant. Frank grabbed Emily's arm roughly while Kyle pinned her shoulders from behind, forcing her into the SUV like she was a dangerous criminal. She screamed, not from fear, but from the betrayal of the place she once called a safe neighborhood. Jason lunged forward, only for Kyle to shove a taser-like device directly into his chest. "No further, Mr. Whitaker. You're already on the watch list." In those chaotic seconds, the SUV doors slammed shut, tires screeched, and the vehicle vanished behind the trees, taking Emily with it, taking the last trace of peace from the Whitaker home. Jason stood frozen. The hose was still running, drops of water falling onto the tulip bed like a slow, aching heartbeat. No one in the neighborhood came to help. One man peeked from behind a curtain, then closed it immediately. A woman bowed her head, avoiding eye contact, and the delivery driver sped up and drove off. The entire street fell into silence, as if no one had seen a thing. But Jason saw, and he would never forget. Jason Whitaker couldn't remember how he even got to the police station. All he knew was that his hands were still damp from the garden hose, and his shirt still carried the faint scent of freshly cut grass as he stepped through the frosted glass doors of the precinct. The front desk was empty. A small TV mounted on the wall was playing a dull news segment, while a young officer sat with his feet up on the desk, chewing on a cold egg sandwich. "I need to report a crime," Jason said, his voice caught in his throat. "What happened, sir?" The officer slowed his chewing, not out of curiosity, but from the bare minimum of courtesy. "Two men just kidnapped my wife, right in front of our house. They were wearing fake HOA uniforms, drove a black SUV, no plates, no paperwork, and—" "You got cameras?" the officer interrupted. "No, but That's tough," he shrugged. "Might have just been a civil enforcement under HOA bylaws. They pull stunts like that sometimes." Jason stared in disbelief. "You mean you've seen people dragged away in broad daylight and just call it civil enforcement?" "The officer on duty for your area is Granger. Let me page him." 13 minutes later, Officer Tony Granger walked in. His uniform was slightly wrinkled, coffee swirling in his mug, and his expression was cold, granite cold. Jason repeated the story, for the third time, this time with full detail and the panic clawing at his chest. But when he finished, Granger simply leaned back in the chair, arms crossed, shaking his head. If the HOA had authority, there's nothing you can do. And if you signed the community covenants when you bought the house, you already agreed to it. Jason couldn't believe his ears. Authority? They're not employees. They have no legal power. They printed fake badges. I checked. There is no agency called HOA Enforcement Division. Granger remained calm. Well, some of those HOA folks can be a bit overzealous. My advice? Hire a civil attorney. We don't get involved in those internal administrative matters. They kidnapped someone. Jason slammed his hand on the desk. And you're sitting there talking like they just warned someone about a fence color violation. They kidnapped my wife. A few officers nearby glanced over, then looked away again. Tony shrugged one last time. I can't file a report unless there's proof of unlawful coercion. No camera footage, no eyewitnesses, no medical record. There's nothing for me to sign off on. Jason walked out of the station like a man who'd been shot but left without bleeding. The sun was still shining. Across the street, someone was selling balloons to a group of laughing kids. He felt like the world had shifted gears, spinning in a new direction where logic had been replaced by loopholes, and justice was just a name on someone's badge. If they chose to stand with you, no one stood with him, not the police, not the neighbors, not the HOA. He had no witnesses, no footage, no official proof, but he had the truth, and he had a reason to fight. And in this twisted world, where a wreath could be treated like a crime, Jason realized if he didn't go find his wife himself, no one else ever would. 40. To the residents of Eastfield, Frank and Kyle Dawson were little more than blurry faces in the crowd, the kind of people you might pass at the plumbing supply store or spot standing silently at a neighborhood meeting without ever saying a word. But the truth was far darker. They were shadows, disguised as dullness. And now, Jason Whitaker was starting to track them down. Frank Dawson used to be a mall security guard, a temp job he treated like a calling, until the day he was fired for wrongfully detaining a single mother who refused to stop at a toy store entrance. Losing that job didn't humble Frank. It reignited a long-standing obsession, obedience and control. Kyle was different. He had a prior conviction for threatening someone with a knife during a bar fight. He also had a documented history of impulse control disorder, the type to act before thinking, quick to anger, and with no concept of boundaries. But what made him truly dangerous was his blind loyalty to his older brother. Together, the two created what they called the Eastfield HOA Compliance Task Force, an unregistered, unofficial organization that didn't exist in the neighborhood bylaws, had no legal standing, no certification, and no oversight. But they didn't need to be real. They just needed to look real. They had plastic badges made at a sports trophy shop, ordered tactical vests, flashlights, and body cams online, printed hundreds of HOA warning notices on pastel-colored paper, each with a QR code leading to an empty Google form. All of it was stored in a garage labeled with an impressively hollow name, Mays Property Preservation, LLC, a shell company with no office, just a P.O. box. No one in the community ever checked. No one asked for permits. People saw vests, heard firm voices, noticed the shiny badges, and believed. What began with a few warning slips escalated quickly. They searched backyards if gates were left open, issued citations to children for parking their bikes too close to the curb, planted hidden cameras in bushes for safety surveillance. And then came Emily, labeled a violator for disrupting visual harmony with a simple spring wreath. In their system, she was flagged as a Level 3 offense, community morale disruption via unvetted visual display. They wrote the reports themselves, issued their own enforcement orders, called themselves enforcers. And when they acted, they didn't need legal justification. They needed only one thing, the belief that no one would dare stop them. Not the government, not the community, not anyone, except Jason. 40. For 2 straight days, Jason Whitaker didn't sleep. The first night, he sat motionless on the front steps of his home, the porch light casting a dull glow on the fake HOA badge Frank had shoved in his face. The second night, he drowned himself in maps, property records, satellite images, and one fragile thread of hope. The smartwatch Emily had been wearing while she crafted the wreath. And maybe, just maybe, they had forgotten to remove it. The GPS app showed a flickering signal. Weak, inaccurate, but enough. Enough to trace a faint trail stretching beyond the neighborhood toward a foreclosed property on the northern edge of town, Birch Hollow Lane. Jason parked his truck 200 meters away, hidden among rotting trees, his hands trembling as he held up a battered pair of binoculars. At the end of the weed-choked path stood a boarded-up house, its windows sealed tight with plywood. But beneath it, in the basement, through a crack in the crumbling concrete foundation, he saw her, Emily. Sitting on the cold floor, her wrist loosely fastened to a rusty pipe by a length of chain. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't panicked. She just stared toward the window crack, as if she somehow knew someone was looking back. Jason nearly rushed in right then and there, but he stopped himself. One wrong move. And she'd vanish again, and this time, maybe forever. On the way back, a memory surged through him, something a former colleague once said. Want to bring down someone abusing power? Don't call the cops. Call Monica Braxton. An hour later, Jason was knocking on the door of a converted warehouse on the outskirts of the county. No flashy sign, no receptionist, just a small engraved plaque. Monica Braxton, attorney at law, licensed in 5 states, feared in all of them. The door creaked open. The woman standing there didn't ask who he was. Trim building, silver hair, thin glasses, no smile, no pleasantries. Just a handshake, like forged steel, and 5 words that cracked like a command. Come in. Tell me everything. Leave nothing out. Jason spoke, without pause, from the wreath to the SUV, to the freezing basement and the eyes of a wife imprisoned but unbroken. Monica didn't flinch, not until he played the video. Emily, forced to recite lines like a confession, her eyes blurred, her voice defiant. Monica watched it to the end, wiped her glasses, stood up. Her words were blunt, but they hit like a verdict. They're not getting arrested. They're getting buried. 40. Less than 48 hours after that fateful meeting with Monica Braxton, Jason Whitaker was no longer just a desperate husband. He had become the lead witness in what would soon shake the entire state, a case the media would chillingly label the invasion behind the HOA mask. Monica wasted no time. She bypassed the local police entirely, who had already shown themselves either complicit or incompetent, and submitted the evidence directly to the state attorney general's office. The video of Emily being coerced into reading a forced confession, seated in a dim basement, wasn't just hearsay. It was irrefutable visual proof, attached to an emergency case file. Within 3 days, a grand jury was convened. Each charge was outlined and confirmed: kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, impersonating public officials, conspiracy to commit unlawful civil enforcement, operating a fraudulent organization with intent to deceive and psychologically terrorize. Once the arrest warrants were signed, the state police commander and 4 intercounty sheriffs led the raid on Birch Hollow Lane themselves. Frank and Kyle Dawson were arrested inside what they proudly called the Regional Compliance Headquarters, in reality, just a mold-infested basement of a condemned home. Emily was rescued, exhausted but unbroken. She refused the ambulance, saying only one thing as she walked out the front door: "I walk on my own feet." News spread like wildfire. Clips from the so-called Eastfield Ethics Archive, a YouTube channel where Frank and Kyle had uploaded dozens of their reform sessions, were leaked. Americans across the country were horrified by a brutal truth. All it took was 2 unemployed brothers, a plastic badge, and a few sets of tactical gear to turn a peaceful neighborhood into a psychological prison. Other HOAs scrambled to release statements denying any association. Legal experts dissected every HOA clause the Dawson brothers had twisted to justify their actions. Evening talk shows filled with debates, analysts, and guest panels. And while the nation buzzed, courtroom 4B at the Westford County Courthouse was packed like never before. Monica entered with a case file as thick as the indictment of an entire regime. Jason sat beside her, eyes never leaving his wife's hand, where faint marks from the chain still lingered on her skin. Emily hid nothing. She sat there like a living testament, not with tears, but with truth. When Frank and Kyle were led into the courtroom, they were no longer the arrogant enforcers they had once pretended to be. There were no cheers, no applause, only silence. A silence colder than steel. The sharpest blade justice can ever wield against those who invoke authority without a shred of integrity. Courtroom 4B was packed to the brim before the morning sun had even touched the roof of the Westford County Courthouse. Not a single seat was left. Residents of Eastfield, media outlets, civil rights groups, they all came not just for a trial, but for a reckoning. A moment to redefine the line between authority and atrocity. Emily Whitaker sat poised, no makeup, no attempt to cover anything. The chain marks on her wrist were still visible, intentionally. When Monica Braxton had gently suggested she wear sleeves, Emily had simply shaken her head. They need to see. Not because I'm a victim, but because I survived. When called to the stand, Emily did not cry. She spoke as if reading from a diary bound in skin and inked in blood. The cold basement, the rusted chain, the camera's unblinking eye, and the cognitive correction phrases they forced her to repeat until her own voice began to sound like a stranger's. They didn't silence me, she said. They made me question my worth. They wanted me to believe I was the problem. The courtroom fell into a silence so complete, even the air seemed to hesitate. The jurors sat like stone. But their eyes had changed. No longer mere civilians doing their civic duty. They had become witnesses, witnesses to a crime that spilled no blood, yet cut deeper than any blade ever could. When Frank and Kyle Dawson were led in, their gray suits couldn't hide the tremble in their steps or the emptiness in their gaze. Frank wouldn't lift his head. Kyle clutched the bench in front of him as if searching for someone to blame, or someone to save him, but no one looked back. Judge Marcus Delaney, a military veteran with 22 years on the bench, regarded them not with rage, but with the solemn weight of a man who had seen the soul rot of society up close. His voice was deep, not loud, not theatrical, but each word dropped like a stone into still water. You created a counterfeit world, fake badges, fake laws, fake titles, but the fear you instilled, that was real. You mistook silence for consent, uniforms for authority, but authority does not come from appearance. It comes from law, from ethics, from the will of the people. The sentence required no gavel. 100 years for each count of kidnapping, 75 years for each act of unlawful imprisonment, 25 years for each instance of impersonating an official. No parole, no reduction, no escape. Total, 10,248 years per defendant. Frank collapsed into his chair. Kyle turned and shouted toward the crowd, "We kept this place clean. We were the good guys." No one replied, no boos, no cheers. Just the heavy final silence, the kind of silence only justice can leave behind. And as the last of the imposters were led past Jason and Emily, something returned, something long lost by the people of Eastfield, faith, stitched back together not with words, but with a verdict that echoed like thunder in spring. After the trial, Jason and Emily Whitaker held no celebration. They didn't appear on TV. They turned down every interview. Instead, they packed up their lives in silence and sold the house in Eastfield, a place that had once been their home, but now stood as the hollow shadow of a nightmare named controlled community. When the realtor asked where they were headed, Jason simply replied, "Nowhere specific, just far enough." From sirens, rule boards, and gates locked by fear. They drove south, across 3 states, 12 gas stations, and hundreds of miles, until they reached a lakeside town where the waves kissed the shore gently and porch lights stayed on because someone forgot to switch them off, not because a system told them to. The new house was smaller, low roof, pale blue walls, no HOA, no parking signs, no facade compliance standards. Just neighbors who brought lemon bars and asked the dog's name, not the fence manufacturer. On the 3rd day after moving in, as Jason was reattaching the mailbox hinge, Emily appeared holding a small box. She opened it. Inside was something she had quietly made throughout her recovery, a new wreath. But unlike the one before, the one labeled a visual disturbance, this wreath was deep red, not the red of holidays, not the red of ornamental flowers. It was the red of survival, of blood that hadn't spilled, but had dried silently beneath the skin. It didn't match the house. It wasn't soft. It wasn't tasteful. And that was the point. Emily hung it on the front door. She didn't ask permission. She didn't check for approval. She didn't glance toward the neighbors. She stepped back a few paces, looked at it, and gave a single nod, as if signing a declaration of her own. They tried to erase my name. Now I write it again, with my own hand. The following week, a woman from across the street stopped by. She held a basket of fresh lemons, her eyes drawn to the crimson wreath. She tilted her head, curious. That wreath, does it mean something special? Jason glanced at Emily. She gave a small, quiet smile. Then he answered, slowly, clearly, "It means we're still here." The woman nodded, placed the lemon basket on the porch railing, and walked back home without another word. And sometimes, that's all a person needs to start again. Not sympathy, not comfort, just recognition. Unconditional, undeniable. The story of Jason and Emily Whitaker isn't merely about a kidnapping or the abuse of a neighborhood association's name. It's a powerful reminder of how authority can be faked and how society can become dangerous, not because evil is too strong, but because good people choose silence. In a world increasingly ruled by codes, checklists, and community standards, we often forget a simple truth. Laws deserve respect only when they serve people, not when they suppress them. When symbols of authority are wielded as weapons of fear, we can't afford to look away. This story also poses a question that should haunt each of us. If a simple wreath can be seen as a threat, then what does freedom really mean? No one protected Emily, not the police, not the neighbors, not the system. And in that moment, Jason had nothing but the truth, unwavering resolve, and love for his wife. But he didn't collapse. He searched, he acted, and he chose to believe that justice isn't found in stacks of paperwork or a rubber stamp, but in the choice not to surrender. The real world rarely gives us headline trials, thunderous verdicts, or medals for doing the right thing. But any one of us can be the Jason in our own story. The one who dares to ask why, the one who stands when others turn away. And in the end, the most powerful message didn't come from the courtroom. It came from the crimson wreath Emily hung on their new front door, a symbol of survival, of rebirth, and of a quiet declaration. I am not defined by fear. I choose what stays and what must go. We can't always control what happens around us, but we can control how we respond. And maybe, just maybe, that is the purest kind of freedom. The freedom from silent resignation and the freedom to live a life that doesn't require permission. If this story made you reflect on justice, on the fine line between order and control, or if you simply felt a connection with Jason and Emily, please like the video and subscribe so you won't miss the stories still to come. And don't forget to share this video with anyone who's ever been crushed by fake authority. Do you think the sentence was harsh enough? Do you side with silence or with action? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, whether praise or criticism, because every voice matters in building the strong, united community we all deserve.